Hi, I'm Jim Doti, and welcome to Dialogue. My guest is Michael Scheuer. He was station chief of the CIA's Bin Laden unit in the late 90s and remained a counterterrorism analyst until 2004. He's the author of many books, including the best-selling Imperial Hubris, Why the West is Losing the War on Terrorism, and his recently released Osama Bin Laden, a biography reviewers have called insightful and unnerving. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you very kindly, sir.
My usual co-host, Christina Dodge, isn't here with me today, so I have you all to myself.
That's not much of a prize, sir.
Well, an important book. I was reading the New York Times book review, Sunday book review, just last week, and I read the glowing review of your work. Congratulations.
Thank you very kindly, sir.
Nice to get a positive review from NYT.
It is, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
So congratulations. And from the review and from the amazing book and many ideas that seem to run contrary to the accepted wisdom. So in many ways, you're an iconoclast in terms of the things you say. First of all, let's start with, is Osama Bin Laden still alive?
Oh, I think so, sir. In his culture, if he had died, they would be mourning, but they would also be celebrating because he had embraced martyrdom, as they say. He had died fighting for his God. In addition, the National Security Agency has done a voice print on Bin Laden every time he's spoken in public since 1996. And they did one as recently as about 6 weeks ago when he spoke about Africa. And it was the same voice we have been hearing since 1996.
You know what's amazing is that in your book you seem to suggest that as much as it seems like we're after him and trying to capture him, that in a way the government doesn't want to find him.
Well, I think what I tried to suggest, sir, is they have not taken the Afghan situation very seriously. We have 100,000 troops in Afghanistan, and about 1 in 3 of them are actually shooters, are combat troops. So those gentlemen and ladies are in a country bigger than Texas, with the highest mountains on earth, and they have to keep President Karzai in power. They're supposed to build a democracy. They're supposed to rebuild the economy, build a transportation and communications infrastructure from scratch, defeat the Taliban, eradicate the world's largest and most violent heroin industry, and in their spare time, look for Osama Bin Laden.
Yeah.
So I think it's...
So they're not taking this seriously, is what you're saying.
Well, the government isn't. No, sir. Sending 100,000 troops to Afghanistan is really a signal of our unseriousness.
Well, let's go back further in time when you were in the CIA, and you're advising, and member of the CIA, advising government, and no one seemed to listen to you on how he can be captured.
Well, I think it was less that they wouldn't listen than they wouldn't act, sir. We gave President Clinton, between May of 1998 and May of 1999, 10 opportunities to end this problem. Twice we could have tried to capture Bin Laden using CIA assets. And 8 times we had the exact position where he was spending the night in a house or in a tent. And the president decided on each occasion not to shoot.
Why?
Well, in a kind of a post facto way, he said since he's left office that the intelligence wasn't good enough. But on one occasion, and I think it typifies the reaction of the president, of many presidents, Bin Laden was in the desert in Kandahar in Afghanistan, and he was visiting a camp of some princes from the United Arab Emirates. And we knew when he would enter the camp and when he would leave. And so he was a very easy target. We could have hit him with the military's either a fixed-wing aircraft or a missile. But instead, the president had his advisors call the United Arab Emirates and warn them that we knew they were in the desert and we knew Bin Laden was nearby. And they left immediately, so we lost the chance to kill Bin Laden. It turned out that the father of those princes who were associating with Bin Laden was about to buy $8.5 billion worth of F-16s, and they were afraid they would lose the deal if one of the princes got killed.
Well, let's step forward in time to the present. Do you think the same machinations are at work?
You know, I don't know the answer to that, but we are very conscious, certainly after the meltdown in the economics of the United States. We're very concerned about oil. We're very concerned about not offending people who produce oil. So I think our troops on the ground, our intelligence officers on the ground, are very committed to it. I just think they're overworked, sir. I think that's the issue at this point in time.
Let's say he were to be captured and tried, I guess by a U.S. court.
Well, it's an interesting question. I think realistically we should have learned a lesson from Saddam Hussein. We don't want to capture him. If we come across him, we want him to be killed. We don't want Osama bin Laden in the Southern Judicial District of New York for 3 years.
As a martyr.
As a martyr, speaking on CNN and Al Jazeera. It would be too damaging to the United States. And so I think we want to take him out. Will it end the problem? I'm afraid it won't. We really did for bin Laden what he probably could have never done for himself by invading Iraq. The invasion of Iraq was, if you will, the scriptural predicate in Islam for a jihad. An infidel country invading a Muslim country unprovoked, occupying it, and then putting in a government that's ruling by man-made laws, not God-made laws. And in essence, what we did, I hope unwittingly, is to take bin Laden and Al-Qaeda from being a man and a group to making it a philosophy and a movement. And it will survive bin Laden.
So what you're saying is the bin Laden legacy will continue whether he's dead or wherever he may be right now, and in fact government policy, U.S. government policy, has been counterproductive in helping preserve his legacy.
In many ways, we are essential to him. He's kind of turned Clausewitz on his head, sir. Bin Laden and the people who follow him, their center of gravity is our foreign policy. What we do in the Muslim world is what motivates the enemy. And we have not been able to admit that to ourselves yet. We still have a president, the fourth president now, who's telling the American people that we're being attacked because they hate our freedoms, they hate women in the workplace, they hate me having a beer after work. Mm-hmm. And what I tried to do in this book is to explore all of the documents that bin Laden himself has produced. There's no evidence in over 850 pages of documents, of primary sources, that he cares how Americans live. They certainly would not have the kind of lifestyle in a country run by Islamists, but they don't care how we live. What they care about and what motivates them is the impact of our foreign policy, whether it's support for Israel or our support for Arab tyrannical governments, our presence on the Arab Peninsula. And until we come to grips with that, we're really fighting an enemy that doesn't exist.
Now I understand, I think it was in this review that I read, that Osama bin Laden has read your works and your writing.
Yeah, fortunately or unfortunately, in 2007, he said something like, if you want to understand why you're losing this war, read Scheuer's book, Imperial Hubris. And I think you probably can imagine how many friends that won for me. But all he was...
What did he mean by that?
I think all he really meant was, at last, somebody in the West is taking seriously what we're saying and is presenting it to the American people.
And what is that? What is that? How can you crystallize that message?
We're being attacked for what our government does, not how Americans think or live. And so this
it's not a jihad against American culture and democracy and freedom?
Not at all, sir. You know, bin Laden and his generation went to school in many ways on the Ayatollah Khomeini. He, while he lived in Iran, tried to ignite a jihad against the Americans because we were debauched, because of our culture, because women were in the workplace, because we had degenerate movies. No one blew themselves up for that. Even when they destroyed our embassy in Beirut in 1983, they did it under the umbrella of the Ayatollah's rhetoric, but they attacked us because we were on their ground. And so bin Laden, his lieutenants, other radicals know that no Muslim is going to blow themselves up because my daughters go to university. But an endless number, apparently, will attack and die because of our support for the Israelis, because of our invasion of Iraq. And until we accept that, this is a religious war in every sense of the word.
Yeah, but Michael, okay, let's just say, for instance, that President Obama, not Laden now, but President Obama,
yes,
somehow pulls back the troops from not only Iraq but Afghanistan, and we're out of there. Then there's Israel and our policy vis-a-vis Israel. Where's an end? I would imagine that
Well, my own
Osama
views,
bin Laden would then be opposed to that, and there would still be Al-Qaeda terrorism, no matter what we do. I mean, then we have what? We just not support Israel?
well, that would be my view. I'm very much a non-interventionist in the school of Pat Buchanan or Ron Paul. I think there are policies we can change, and policies we can change before we even look at the issue of Israel. For example, there's really nothing we can change about our policy in the Middle East until we do something about energy. As long as we and our allies need energy from the Arabian Peninsula, we have to be the defenders and protectors of tyranny, whether it's the Saudi tyranny, the Kuwaiti tyranny, or the Emirati tyranny. And as long as we do that, it's going to make our advocacy of freedom or democracy appear to be pretty pure hypocrisy.
But Israel doesn't really factor into the energy equation.
It does not.
Our support. So would you recommend that we pull all support, don't sell any arms to Israel, no intervention at all?
A pox on both of their houses, sir. America doesn't have a dog in the fight between the Palestinians and the Israelis. If either or both disappeared tomorrow, the cost of milk in the United States or employment wouldn't have any impact here at all.
Right. So what do you draw from that?
You
we pull out?
You pull out if it's in your interest
and
to do
you
so.
let Israel fend for itself.
That's what I would do, sir. Yes.
Do you think it can fend for itself with?
It has an unlimited or an unaccounted for arsenal of weapons of mass destruction. And I think in the long run, what we've already seen, sir, is the destruction of Israel's security. First by destroying Saddam Hussein, and then by helping to destroy Mubarak. What we've done, really, is to shatter Israel's security on the east and on the west.
Well, that brings us to truly the present day.
Yes.
In the last month, what momentous days
Yes.
we're living in. Seeing these revolutions like dominoes falling from Algeria to Egypt to Libya. How does Osama bin Laden factor into these? Is he a non-entity in this, or does he play a role in these revolutions? Does he have a side in all of this?
He certainly is not responsible for the revolutions. That would be a claim too far, and it would be inaccurate. But there's been a recent spate of writing that these revolutions show that Al-Qaeda is irrelevant and doesn't have any influence. But of course, if you look at what bin Laden has written, as I tried to do in the book over the past 15 years, the two main goals of Al-Qaeda and the people who support it are to destroy the Arab tyrannies and to weaken Israel. And if you look at what's happened in Egypt, whatever follows Mubarak is going to be more Islamic. It's going to be less friendly to Israel. And I read this morning in the New York Times that they've already opened the border with Gaza. So Israeli security has been very much damaged. One goal. And by getting rid of Mubarak, they achieved the second goal, because Mubarak was the most reliable U.S. ally and the most dependable one. He would kill people who, even Egyptians, who are trying to help the Palestinians.
So Al-Qaeda is supportive of these revolutions?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's really nothing democratic about these revolutions. You know, we've watched CNN and Fox and BBC cheerlead for these revolutions. Mm-hmm. And they've read things off of Facebook and off of Twitter. In Cairo, they've interviewed young, clean-cut, English-speaking professional Egyptians. And through all of that, they've come to the conclusion that in 18 days, the Egyptians have accomplished what we have been working on since Runnymede for 800 years. And to imagine the Twitterers and the Facebookers and the people they talk to in Tahrir Square are somehow representative of 80 million Muslims in a pious country like Egypt is really a bridge too far. You know, just logically, in a time of turmoil, potential violence, and political chaos, would a population really turn to an alien ideology like secular democracy instead of 1,000 years of their faith? I think that's counterintuitive to argue.
Yeah, that's kind of scary.
I think it is. I think in some ways Americans have become almost Marxist in their belief in the inevitable triumph of democracy.
And capitalism.
And capitalism. But my gosh, you know, we've been at this, as I said, for 800 years. And we're not quite a perfect Republican experiment yet.
Yeah.
And to expect that to happen in Afghanistan or Iraq or Egypt, where in the first place there's no separation between church and state, is really a naive expectation.
Well, what's interesting is you're saying you don't think Osama bin Laden had a major role in this. You don't think Al-Qaeda did, and have they become non-entities, non-players?
No, so
where they don't. It doesn't matter anymore.
No, it matters very much, and because they are a strong organization, like the Muslim Brotherhood, as you know.
But they hate each other.
Well, except for the goal of establishing an Islamic State.
Yeah, and the mutual hatred for Mubarak.
Yes. And you know, within any chaotic situation, the best organized people at times come out on top, even when they're not the biggest, as Mr. Lenin showed us in 1917 and 18. And I also think they know something that we have forgotten in the West, and that is the usefulness and at times the power of silence. If in those demonstrations in Tunisia or Libya or Egypt, the crowds were holding up signs that said, "Islam is the way," or "Please come home, Brother Osama,"
burning American flags.
American flags, the West, the United States and Britain would have had a knee-jerk reaction of supporting Mubarak, even Gaddafi, against that so-called Islamic threat. So when everything's going your way, without you having to expend resources or manpower, why get in the way of it? Why not take advantage of the opportunity after the dust has settled?
So it's kind of like a lying dog right now, but it can be awakened.
There can be wisdom in silence, sir.
Yeah. So let's say these revolutions play out. Where does Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda enter in? How will they surface next? What if they're relatively insignificant or playing a background role now? What is the future for Al-Qaeda?
The future is to expand these revolutions into Saudi Arabia, into Kuwait if they can, to take advantage of what the chaos brings in Tunisia and Egypt, to put a greater role of Islam into government, and certainly to begin moving people into Gaza from the West, from Egypt, to attack the Israelis, just as they're moving people in from the East through Iraq into the Levant, into Jordan, into Syria, into Lebanon, and to try to converge forces that are not solely Palestinian anymore against the Israelis.
Well, let's get to Israel then. What's the solution?
I think, sir, frankly, that since Mr. Rabin was killed, the both sides have become much more militant, much more, whether you want to call it extremist or not, but certainly the Palestinians are much more religious, much more in tune toward a religious life rather than secularism of Arafat and Fatah. And we certainly see the popularity of a very right-wing government in Israel. So
war is inevitable?
I don't know if war is inevitable, but peace is not inevitable. Some sort of conflict, I believe, will continue for the foreseeable future. And
it's more likely because of these revolutions?
I think it is more likely for the simple reason that Israel's security in the immediate sense depended on the existence of Arab tyrannies. It depended on Mubarak. It depended on Saddam, who ruled, who played around with Palestinians. But at the end of the day, his activity was never going to destroy Israel. So we've gotten rid of him. We've gotten rid of Mubarak, who protected the Gaza border. So what do we have left? We have Jordan, which is probably a more tenuous, has more tenuous stability than Egypt had. If that border is opened, that's another problem for Israel. And for all the Israelis hate, and we hate the Syrians, without Assad's government there, that border on the Golan and other places would be open also. So
interesting.
It's a very strategically dangerous time for the Israelis. And to their credit, they were the only ones in the world who stood up and said, listen, Whatever stability is in the Middle East is going to be broken by the downfall of Mubarak.
And how does Iran enter into this? Will the dominoes flow into Iran? Is revolution imminent?
You never know what's going to happen in Iran, I think, sir. But the one thing I would say is there's not going to be a peaceful overturn, as there was so far, at least in Egypt. The mullahs are not going to go down gently. And I think
More like a Libya situation, magnified because of the greater population.
I think that's right, sir. And the greater competence of the Iranian government in terms of military and security terms, I think it would be a very bloody thing. And I've frankly been very disturbed by the idea that American students and young people, and even Mrs. Clinton, have been urging young Iranian kids to get out on the street and demonstrate because they're going to end up dead.
If President Obama were here now and you were to advise him, based on all of your knowledge, your background, lengthy background, one of the most informed individuals in the Middle East, what would you recommend?
Tell the truth, sir. I think it's time for an American president to tell the truth, to tell them that from the enemy's perspective, the enemy is waging a religious war against us because it believes our policies are an attack on Islam. It's not to say those policies are evil or that they were made by madmen, but it is unreasonable to keep telling the American people a falsehood, that their daughters are going to have to wear burqas to school, that you're being attacked because we have the early primaries in Iowa every 4 years. That's simply a lie. The American people have to come to grips with the fact that their foreign policy motivates the enemy. If the current foreign policy is necessary and effective in protecting America, that's fine. We should not change it. But the American people ought to know that there's a cost to that. And the cost of status quo policy is the motivation of our enemy.
It sounds like a Ron Paul kind of a hands-off kind of...
I don't even think, sir, that we're in the position yet of saying hands off because we haven't squared with each other. For a person to say the United States has earned enormous enemies in the Muslim world because we've supported police states for the last 50 years is not an opinion or an assessment, it's a fact. And once you have that fact, you can decide on, do we continue? Do we change halfway? Do we abandon all of it? But until you accept the fact, you just are lockstep. You are in a locked position. You don't change anything.
And what about what we do with respect to Osama Bin Laden?
I think we need to kill him as soon as possible.
Really?
He is at the center of whatever they're planning to do in the United States next. He is, it's always better to have a dead martyr than it is to have a smart guy alive and leading forces against you. It's not sufficient to win the war, but it's important that we do it.
And finally, what do we do about Israel?
My own view is let the cards fall where they may, sir. And that's simply because I don't think we intervened. We've intervened on both sides, and we've strung out the conflict until it's probably irreconcilable. My own view is our intervention over the past 20 years probably has prevented Israel from settling the problem one way or another.
So maybe the solution to all this is placing a huge tax on gasoline so we can come up with alternatives sooner rather than later?
I think that's the beginning, sir. Until we do something about energy.
That's what it sounds like.
Yes, sir.
What you're saying and the message is if we can reduce our reliance, then that area becomes not as critically
Certainly the
essential.
peninsula, sir. There's nothing on the peninsula that's worth the life of one dead young Marine, except for oil.
Do you think the Sunnis will start a civil war with the Shias? What we had, in a way, in Iraq now intensifying
I think,
as a result of these revolutions?
It really depends. I think that the flashpoint of most danger is Bahrain. The Saudis are very unlikely, and the Kuwaitis, to tolerate another Shia country on the peninsula, especially one that's immediately adjacent to the eastern province of Saudi Arabia, which is also a Shia majority. And if it comes to blows between the Sunnis and the Shias around Bahrain, the question will be, what will Iran do? Will it watch its co-religionists get slaughtered, or will they come across and help? That's the most dangerous point right now in the Middle East.
Wow, just some amazing stuff. Michael, thank you, first of all, for being on the show.
Thank you, sir.
And also for being with us at Chapman University today and lecturing in one of our classes. Means a great deal to have someone of your background and experience talking with our students. And to our audience, again, Michael Scheuer, Osama Bin Laden, an amazing read. And if you want to get to the grist of what's going on in the Middle East, I highly recommend it.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks again for being on the show.
It was my pleasure.